Morning, Chris. How are you today?
Hi, Ron. Doing great.
So let's talk about now the steps for planning a marketplace. And so we've put kind of a miniature checklist, if you will, here together that lists out the main important things that you need to kind of think through, things that you should make decisions about. And I'll go ahead and start. The first one is a checklist, right? Find and build your checklist. At Clarity here, we've manufactured quite a few white papers. We've put together some checklists. I just finished one a couple weeks ago for an auction marketplace. We've done them for integrated e-commerce marketplaces. And so what you want to do is find a good checklist or put your checklist together. And so some of these items here that we're going to go through, I'm just going to kind of mention it and then explain what it is. And then I'm going to let Chris dive in technically and talk about how that really is affected by and what the technology that you're going to be looking or selecting needs to be able to do in order to handle that. So the first thing on the checklist is about the vendors, right? Because the main thing about most marketplaces is you're allowing vendors and or sellers, whatever you want to call them, sellers and vendors, to come in and list their wares and sell them on your marketplace. So there's a whole bunch of different things about vendors, right, Chris? There's registration and how are you going to handle drop shipping? And we have to split the order. What happens if somebody comes in and places an order in my marketplace for 3 items? All 3 items are with different vendors. Well, there's 3 separate orders that I need to send out from the platform now to all 3 vendors so they can each fulfill their part of the order. And then those vendors have to send the tracking status back so the person can track all 3 separate orders, right? There's commissions. Do they do their own commission? How do we integrate? Is it all just EDI? Is there API? There's a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to you now so you can kind of dive in a little bit more to the vendor and seller portion of the marketplace.
Well, thanks. And I think that was a great overview because this is really detailed depending on your business workflow. And each of the different businesses that we work with, they tend to cater to different aspects of this marketplace opportunity and marketplace offering. Some of our clients leverage a buying group or group purchasing type of scenario. And in that state, it makes a lot of sense to be able to have complex workflows that can handle and self-service, make it self-service for the user. A situation where they may be purchasing as a group purchase and dealing with things like containers and really understanding the nuances of the, sort of the lead time on drop shipping, et cetera. The other thing is, as a general marketplace use, one of the big things that we see is whenever a vendor is registering, we're going to need them to potentially provide some form of verification of their company as a sort of edification within the marketplace. Now, we've done some pretty interesting things here on, and this can be a much more simple version to get users into the marketplace, and that's typically going to be the trend. But if you sort of go on the spectrum to the more complicated scenarios, we've done those too. And that can include things like doing a background check that's automated and fully integrated. It can include having a legally enforceable document that they have to sign because they're asserting and attesting to certain things. And they have to actually sign it, and then we can verify that signature in an automatic fashion and through workflows where basically that gets persisted into a CRM or an ERP system. So we have that for legal, accounting, and et cetera. And so now we've done a background check. We've done this attestation and legal requirements, signatures, maybe even other things that we're verifying, like information about their business. Maybe we do a credit check on them. We've done that before. So wherever you are in the spectrum with vendors, and keep in mind, with vendors, they're typically, you want a higher bar for them. And so you just want to understand, what is that process for you? Is it going to be just a few questions and maybe some sort of verification for them? And then you let them in. A lot of times what we see is whenever we're dealing with vendors, we're going to set it up so that they sort of have to behave a certain way or sort of complete certain even gamified steps so that they can then get access to more features. Some level of commitment that they're going to have to make in order to sort of get access to our marketplace so that we can maintain a level of credibility and consistency, I think is the key word here, for our users within the marketplace. And so we want that relatively higher bar for the vendors. Just sort of depends on your industry, right, Ron, that you're in, as to, what that's going to look like.
The level. Yeah. I mean, on a simple level, it might just, hey, they have to agree to the terms of use, right? It might be really simple. But like you said, on some of the bigger ones, you certainly want them to behave a certain way to maintain not only consistency, but the trust that you're trying to establish on your site, which brings those buyers back over and over again. So the next one is features. So a couple of the features before you dive in and talk about those, obviously we've got ones like comparison engine, right? If I'm going out looking for a specific product in a marketplace, theoretically, I could go look for that product and I could see that product available across multiple vendors, and I could compare price, or I could compare lead time, or I could compare, maybe they have a different warranty for the same thing, right? So comparison is a big one. Being able to filter out and see more things from the seller, being able to communicate with the seller, ask them questions about the product. But I also want you to dive in a little more, like some of the ones we did on the pool one, where we had hard and soft stops. We had the ability to go in and manually do quotes, right? Where people could go in and say, hey, Mr. Vendor, are there any vendors out there that if I buy 100 units of these and I'm willing to pay $100, where we did some of that automated, they can put a threshold to say, we'll accept up to this price, and it'll auto accept that, or it won't because it's outside the threshold, and it auto sends. So there's some really complex things that obviously I did not explain well. But if you can dive into some of those, I think the core features most people know. I mean, I think we've all shopped on Amazon. I think, they're the king of marketplaces, or Alibaba, right? Everybody's been there. Everybody's shopped on there. So we all know the basic functionality of seeing the sellers and comparing the products and seeing related products and all the basic core features. So on your checklist, make sure to write down the basic stuff that you want to make sure, right? So when you go shopping for your platform, you can get a demo of those core features. The most important thing, though, is the platform scalable and customizable for the additional core functionality that your business needs? And that's really what I want Chris to dive into now, right? Some of that hard stuff like hard and soft stops and manual quoting and auto threshold acceptance of bidding, and just some stuff that we've seen that were unique to our clients, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, I think it's really probably the most important thing to take away from this checklist when you're looking at software is, can it adapt to my scenario? Because one of the things that led us to create the software that we created was literally for 7 or 8 years, we worked with off-the-shelf tools exclusively. And what we found in that process was that the last mile, the last 5 to 10% of functionality tended to be such that we were literally painted into a corner because we had completed 95% with this quote unquote off the shelf functionality. But the business, in order to fully realize its objectives of self-service and low friction for the users, it really had to have these 3 capabilities. That's where the bottleneck was. And frankly, Ron, this has been sort of an accumulation over those 7 to 8 years. And then 10 years after that of validating it for the entire 10 years that this is really the bottom line. You need a set of core features, and you really do want to understand what are those core features. And there should be a reasonable set of core capabilities within whatever marketplace platform you choose. But probably most importantly, and this depends on your business. If your business is mature enough that, or it's complex enough, that you need certain things, and that they're bottlenecks, or you are projecting that they reasonably will be. Does the platform you're working with really have a set of architecture that is friendly toward that? And what do I mean? Well, let's just take an example. Let's look at the example of Legos versus maybe clay. Clay is great. You can make whatever you want. But once you bake it, it's kind of set. And I'm not a clay expert, but I don't really think a lot of people add more clay after the fact. But with Legos, you can add and remove as you need. And ultimately, the point is, like, once a platform is sort of set in stone, if it's not well made, it's going to be like clay that's been baked. It looks really good. It's really cool. It can be used for that specific purpose, but really not a lot else. And it's sort of brittle. And like if you crack it, it's gone. Whereas with Legos, they're really made to be, interchanged. And with software, that is very much the case, that depending on how the software was architected and written, it can either do really well with a specific set of tasks, or it can do really well with a specific set of tasks and be adaptive to new tasks. And if you think about it, what is the basis for the platform? Was it made to be adaptive, and was it made to be compatible with changes and adaptations that you're going to have? And without going into super detail on the technical front, I will just say that some keywords that you should look for are things like plugins or modules, the ability to override or extend, and then look for examples of that. Look for specific examples where mechanically you can see that, okay, all of these different areas of this marketplace platform were overridden, and I can see actual examples of that, and it's a viable solution. And one of the key questions that I would always ask around that is, what are the limitations? What are the areas that can't be extended or overridden, and why? And so if you get those answers, you can sort of understand, what the limitations actually are. The answer should be effectively, there are no limitations, but there may be, more overhead to overriding or extending a core feature. And you need to know what that is ideally.
Yeah. My big litmus test is the API, right? As I'm doing demos, I have a lot of people come in and ask us about our marketplace, and we start talking through that. And they're like, well, how does it stack up to this, right? And I'll say, well, have you looked at the documentation for the API for that platform? And they're like, no. And we'll Google it, we'll open it up, and we'll walk through the API together. And I'll show them that most APIs out there have anywhere from about 200 to 500 endpoints, right? And they're like, see, look at all the stuff it has there. It's all documented. It can do everything. And I said, yeah, watch this. And I pop into our platform. I go to the API documentation, and we have over 11,000 endpoints documented within the platform. So when you start taking 500 endpoints and 500 functions that you can do within a platform to 11,000, they don't even compare, right? I mean, our platform was literally made to be infinitely scalable and was designed that way first. And so when I see all these platforms and these people come in and ask me to evaluate their platforms and say, this is really scalable and customizable, and I'm like, oh, what do you need it to do? This and this and this. Well, then why are you coming to me? Because it doesn't do that. Well, then it's not infinitely scalable. So that's really, for me, the litmus test is I go look at the API. So once I write all my features down, can I go in and integrate all those features? For example, and I'm not picking on WooCommerce. It's the most widely distributed e-commerce plugin in the world, but WooCommerce has about anywhere from 200 to 400 endpoints, depending on which documentation you're looking at, right? But it doesn't do invoicing at all. So when you go to B2B and we try to go integrate that with, I've got clients that have WooCommerce on the front end, but then they come to us to integrate, Dynamics AX on the back end, which those two just don't even sync. But now all of a sudden they've got all this invoicing and all this multi-warehouse. They've got all this capability in their ERP that can't be exposed in WooCommerce, because even if there's a plugin that adds invoicing to WooCommerce, which there is, those plugins don't extend the API. So now we don't have the ability unless we directly integrate directly to the database, which everyone knows is not the way to integrate, right? So this is the most important reason for me why you get these features written down, so that then you can go validate the true capability to extend and support that functionality in the future, which that leads us right into our next bullet point, which is my favorite thing I hear you say all the time. What is your 3 to 5 year plan, right? If you don't have a 3 to 5 year plan, then how do you know what you're choosing today is going to be able to accomplish or potentially be morphed into or grow or shrink or be customized or scale into what your plans are, right? So, Chris, this is one of my favorite things you talk about. Go ahead and talk about the 3 to 5 year plan.
Well, I think this is a great topic. Thank you, Ron. And, this is really important from a business perspective. And regardless of your role, if you're the owner of the business, a key leader within the organization, or someone who's just simply at the core very passionate about where the business is going, et cetera, or any or all of the above. The bottom line is there is a huge opportunity within any company to deliver more value to customers. And, those sort of constituent customers can include and should include both vendors and, and actual buyers within a marketplace environment. And it really should ideally be something that you're constantly asking yourself the question, what would it take to 10x what we're doing right now? What would be the most valuable area for us to focus on that's going to deliver the most value that we're confident we can, within the entire industry, we can be the best at? And these are the sort of clarifying questions that, even though they may be relatively general from a business perspective, they then can be boiled down back into your software selection, can't they? So if you sort of think about it, what is the alignment of the software to be able to help support and drive that vision of, where you can go over the next 3 to 5 years? And the reality of, being a business owner or a key leader or someone who's passionate is you may not accomplish all of these visionary elements, but that's not really the point. The point is moving in that direction. And, you may exceed that vision too. Ultimately, the bottom line is that we've worked with so many clients who have had massive success. And the ones that have massive success are really looking further ahead than the others who are just focused on the short term. And so if you can allow yourself to, consider the short term, which is a tactical requirement, while also looking ahead and having at least a reasonable amount of attention on that 3 to 5 year timeline, this is going to put you into a position where, generally speaking, you're going to be able to sort of, take the long-term view and consistently outperform because of that. Now, what are some of the sort of tactical specifics here? Well, I'll give you a few examples. One of the things that we see just in the near term is things like leveraging deep learning and AI. This is really, really potent within a marketplace because, again, we're focusing on self-service. Now, you're not going to see a whole lot of AI and machine learning and deep learning built into marketplace e-commerce platforms. But is the vendor that you're working with incorporating that? And how can you leverage this sort of automated intelligence to really better serve your customers? And that's just one mechanical example, but it's probably a good one that you can sort of ask yourself, like, if I had someone who was full-time just focusing on these customers to give them better service, give them better information, provide them recommendations that were really useful, reports that are specific to them, et cetera, what would that look like? Because that's what AI can do. And that's just, again, one example. Same thing with automation. How integrated are your systems? And this is something that probably is sort of like an endless opportunity. And you just want to evaluate, what is sort of the law of diminishing returns based on where you're at with your business. But over time and at the limit, you want to fully automate as much as you can based on prioritizing the things that are valuable within your business workflow. And so these are the questions that, and the topics that we really strongly encourage you to think about. You are probably, if you're watching this and you're listening, you're probably at some point in the life cycle where if you iterate on this question and you get it to brass tacks, and we're always happy to help, you're welcome to reach out and let us know. You will probably put yourself in a position to double or even 10x over a relatively short period of time by focusing on the right things.
Yeah, agreed. I love the old cliche, if you don't know where you're going, every road will get you there.
Yes, very true. Very true.
Even failure, right? Or even going
That's
completely
right.
sideways and no growth whatsoever, just surviving. So yeah, I love that. Thanks, Chris. All right. So the next one we're going to cover is the budget on our planning your marketplace list. So the budget can be fairly comprehensive, right? Because when people call me, it's really interesting. They call and they talk about, they're always looking for a web design company or somebody to do an integration or a doctor-patient portal or something. And it's so myopically focused on the one thing. And so what ends up happening is I always try to throw them into, okay, well, not only do you have to budget for the car, you have to budget for the insurance and for the gas and for changing the oil and for the ongoing maintenance. And you're going to probably want to wash your car and probably vacuum your car. And you're going to want to take care of the vehicle, especially if you're buying it, because you can't just turn it in at the end of the lease, right? You have to take care of it. There's a lot of maintenance going forward. So I try to bring that up to people. And the next thing you know, I feel like some of the deals that I lose, it's because I budget myself out, because they go, oh my gosh, well, it's so much more if I go with Clarity. And it's like, no, it's not. It's just, mine's a comprehensive thought process. So I have to be very a la carte when I go through these things so that they compare apples to apples. Because when they're looking at competitive sites and they're doing that, they're like, oh, well, they'll stand a website up for 50 grand. And I'm like, yeah, I'm the same 50 grand, but I also threw in marketing and SEO and plans for helping you make more business and, all the other kind of stuff. And that's really what I want you to dive into, the budget for a marketplace, right? Because it's exactly the same. And people should, even if the original budget just to get it launched is one thing, you want to make sure that you've got enough budget set aside for it to be successful, right? You want to plan for success is the old cliche, right?
That's right. And I think that's a really good point about what folks are getting whenever they get estimates from a vendor or partner like Clarity. And it's really interesting because at the end of the day, it can be a challenge for the business owner or the director or the marketing VP, whatever the role is, possibly the IT director. If you're doing this research and you're digging in to compare apples to apples, because there really isn't sort of a standard litmus that you can measure against. So everyone has their own way of estimating things. And ultimately, being able to put it into categories is really important. And I think you can sort of look at it as capital expenditure and then basically ongoing, monthly and quarterly expenditure, that kind of a thing, operating costs essentially. And so capital expenditure typically is going to be around getting the software in place and getting it built out. But you can, of course, do this in phases. And we strongly recommend that. A lot of our clients, they do have an existing capability. So we're going to want to effectively meet or exceed that capability, but with a framework that's going to be flexible and adaptable so they can phase in improvements and growth and optimization. So I guess ultimately what I would say here is, to the extent that you can detail out and collaborate with whoever you're working with on your marketplace, so that if you do have an existing capability or for sure, and I mean, you've actually validated it with a real business use case scenario that, yes, I need this functionality, I need these features, not just I think I need them, but I actually know that this is something that we need. It needs to work a certain way. Well, the more fidelity you have around that, the more accurate the estimates are going to be that you get for what I would call capital expenditure, upfront expenditure. But you definitely, to your point, Ron, you want to think about the ongoing or operating costs and some of the additional phases that you're going to conduct. And a lot of this work can be done in sort of a spectrum. So you can actually bring folks on internally. You may already have a team internally that you can bring on for a much lower cost, relatively speaking. And you can work with partners like Clarity who are willing to actually teach and train your team so that your internal team can conduct a lot of the ongoing operating overhead at a much lower cost. So a key question for you is, where is the company that you're working with, that you're partnering with, where are they focusing to generate their profits? Are they focusing on delivering a really high value with a product that's flexible and it's going to meet your needs, and they're really accumulating enough volume that they can be profitable around that core value of the product offering? Or are they trying to, nickel and dime you with operating expenses throughout the rest of the process after you get your site live? And so I think that's a really key question. That's something you can get a really good feel for from talking with them and collaborating with them. But the opportunity with the marketplace is extensive beyond just getting the functionality out there. And I think this is something that we could, and we certainly will spend literally an entire webinar going into detailed nuances. But certainly you should keep in mind that there are so many opportunities for ongoing SEO, paid advertising, enhancements to the site, transactional marketing where you're sending direct emails to folks. And really the list goes on, doesn't it, Ron? You should definitely budget for this, whether it's internal or working with a partner, because you're going to get a pretty substantial return on investment for a lot of these categories. In a lot of cases, it'll be, somewhere to, I would say between 3 to 10 times return on investment, or return on ad spend, or whatever metrics we're measuring on. There will be a pretty substantial return. And then if you're doing organic SEO, for example, or transactional emails that you're sending, these don't really have a cost to continue taking advantage of them. They're evergreen, relatively speaking. And so once you set them up and get them in motion, they're going to be available for you to use and continue to build on themselves. And so any thoughts on that as well on your end, Ron?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I always like to call SEO the gift that keeps on giving, right? Because it's the one thing that every ounce invested adds on to every previous ounce invested, right? It's not like pay-per-click where it's just pay to play. You pay $50 and if it doesn't generate anything, well, that was $50. Now you got to pay another $50. It's if you put $50 in, you've now got $50 worth of whatever in the pot. And now the next $50 just adds on to that over time. And it just continues to add and add and add. So I love SEO. I am big on SEO because I'm frugal that way. But, I do understand that for some people, pay-per-click, it's like, I've got clients that'll spend $50,000 a month on pay-per-click and they're like, it generates 5 million in business a month. Who cares? Well, good point, right? I mean, if you can generate the return and do it much faster, then pay-per-click is a play and there's options there. But as Chris said, there are so many things that you want to think about and plan for, because after you have that initial capital expense, not only the SEO, but you can start talking about retargeting and how do I drive additional business and how do I ensure to keep my clients happy so I keep them returning? Are there any benefits for becoming a member? Are there any ongoing things that they can sign up for that helps them keep engaged? Are there any additional reports or statistics that you can send them to show them, how much money they've saved by buying with you, or how many items they bought this month versus last month? Or, there are so many things that you can think up that you don't have to stay within the lines of any other site that you're modeling after. Think outside the box. I mean, that's what we do with Clarity. We constantly sit down and think about differentiation and disruption. Marketing says those are the two things that if you can come with anything that's disruptive or differentiates you from your competitors, that's what you focus on. And I find a lot of times that clients are like, you see this site over here? We want you to build it just like that. I'm like, well, is that one of your competitors? Yep. Well, what, don't you want to surpass them? Oh, we'll never catch them. Why do you say that? Right? Their vision doesn't go beyond. And I love your analogy where you always say the 3 to 5 year plan that we just talked about, right? You always talk about the 3 to 5 year plan. Well, in 3 years, I want to catch our competition, these two competitors. And in 5 years, I want to be the leader, right? So one of the things that helps with that, kind of leading us into the next thing, and it's kind of the sister to budget and timeline always go together, right? So let's talk a little bit about the timeline. I like what you said. You used a comment ago a minute about, you said, make sure you do phases, right? Go ahead and explain to the group here what you're talking about that when it comes to, the difference between maybe the MVP and what are these quote unquote phases? And do you have any ideas around what those phases might be?
Yeah, that's a great comment. And I could not agree more about disruption and being able to sort of get people's attention. And one of the things I want to point out as we move over to timeline is that one of the classic things about marketing and being able to be disruptive in a positive way is to provide a ton of value. And if you niche down and think about your areas of value, like really just think about it and ask yourself, where can I really genuinely help? That's where you should focus. And you should evangelize that. And then it's just going to pour out from you that you're genuinely wanting to help. And that is so convincing and convicting for anyone that hears it. They know it when they see it. And so we just encourage you to think about that And like you said, Ron, that should be part of your ongoing operating plan. And you can take out bigger competitors by providing more value. I mean, substantially, that's what people are looking for in the market. That's a beautiful thing. And yeah, I would say the timeline is really interesting in this way because it depends on your situation and depends on your capitalization and how much you want to put into this kind of the capital outlay for your project. A lot of our clients have really successful marketplaces already, and they know that they need certain baseline functionality and customizations, integrations, etc. And so, of course, to the extent that that's the case for you as well, we want to encourage you that, we don't want to relearn anything. That would be silly. We want to take advantage of everything that you know about your market, everything we know about marketplace in general, etc. With that said, it is quite possible to build this out in phases. And an example of this would be you may have a specific niche within your market, within your marketplace that you can focus on to deliver a full solution with your new system, with your new marketplace project, and deliver that for that niche as a sort of first phase or an MVP. And focus on that exclusively, get everything working in that sort of lower risk environment, and validate that it is in fact working and providing the value that's needed. Substantially, what I've found, and this is just an experience that I think is pretty consistent for anyone who's honest about their experience working on really anything that's complex. Doesn't just involve software, but anything that's complex. It's relatively challenging to project all of the potential timeline issues or actual technical issues or bugs until you sort of get in the weeds. And then there's a difference between testing in a testing environment and how everyone thinks about it versus production. And
right.
There's nothing like having an MVP to push into production in a smaller subset of work, a smaller unit of work that is working software that is pushed into production, even if, again, it's not really a main line or it's not necessarily, a risk for the business. The nature of pushing things into production, this is a forcing function to establish, best practices for a group of people. And no matter how disciplined and how excellent they are and how much experience they have, this is typically a positive thing. So that's why you see in software a lot of times, there's this exponential decay in value with larger capital allotment. Like you put more money in, but you don't necessarily get a linear increase with more money, more results. A lot of times it's with more money, you actually get less results. And so you have to be careful and take it in chunks and measure the performance. And so that's why you see a lot of Agile Scrum, breaking the work into chunks. And that's where we have this idea of an MVP. And, you can do this in different ways. A lot of what we like to do, because a lot of our clients know what they need as a baseline. Again, they have experience with successfully operating a marketplace. We know that they need, at least, 6 months of effort to be expended to get what they need done. But during the course of that 6 months, we need to be, reconciling every month that everything is working from that month that we completed. And that's a really healthy best practice as well. I don't know if you want to chime in there on that, Ron, and thoughts on this, depending on where the business is at as well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Gosh, what do I say? I mean, you and I work together now 13 years, and we've together seen well over 1,000 projects. What do we say on timeline? I'm trying to remember, there was a Harvard quote that says 97% of all projects go over budget and over time, right? So this section we're talking about, this particular video, planning is by far and away the most important. And timeline is one of them, because that's one that seems to kill people a lot, right? Is that they make their plans for their project around some event coming up, or they put some hard timeline on something. The thing is we're dealing with software, we're dealing with customizations, and I like to, whenever I sell a project, I like to have a first initial kickoff meeting. And one of the tips and tricks I give them is I'm like to say, look, this is like going to war. The success of your project is not tied to how well your project goes at all, because you're going to run into issues. And the issues can be technical. They can be somebody getting sick and missing a day. I mean, what happens when your developer who is in the middle of a sprint gets sick and they get COVID? You can't plan for that, right? And that can affect the timeline. It's not like you can just bring another developer in off another project that's in the middle of their sprint and they can just pick up and go forward and finish out your sprint. I mean, it literally affects the project. So you need to plan for issues, and you need to plan on how you're going to address those issues. So you need to have contingencies built into the timeline as well, not just the budget, but how are you going to work with this vendor? I always like to say, the success of your project is directly tied to how well you work with your vendor when these issues arise. And the thing is you don't know what those issues are going to be. They could be budgetary, they could be technical, they could be timeline. You could have someone get sick, someone could leave your team, you could have somebody quit. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is. I've had customers that are launching products and we're building their website to launch the product, and they had problems with the product going into production and their product delayed. And they had PR and press releases and all kinds of things aligned, and it all just fell apart. And they had no contingency plan, right? And it was all on their end. So with timeline, really the best thing is plan, make contingencies, and understand there are going to be issues with your timeline. And that's really where a good relationship with your project manager helps, because really all you need is full transparency, right? Hey, I think there's going to be a problem. So-and-so's out with COVID. It might affect this thing. Okay, what's our contingency? What's our risk plan? What are we going to do? And so the way Chris articulated the different phases, part of making those different phases on paper and able to help address these types of issues might be prioritizing them, right? Okay, well, here's the 27 features we're hoping to have in the panacea. This is every single one of them. You know, these 3, yeah, they're a dream. We doubt we're going to have them. We doubt we're going to be able to afford them. But if we could get them, man, that would be really cool. Great. Well, let's put that out there as the lowest priority. Those are 5s. Here's a couple that are 4s that if something happens, we can move these out. We don't have to have them. And then when you get into the 1s, 2s, and 3s, 1s are, we can't launch the MVP in this limited release like Chris just talked about. Those are the 1s. 2s are, man, this would be great. If we could get any of these in here, this would be great. But if we don't get them in the initial MVP, these are immediately the things we're going to start working on. And then 3s would be the stretch, right? So you've got your have to have, you've got your goal, and then you've got your stretch. And then you've got this other bucket that if they don't get done, you know that in the next 6 months, once you launch, once you get going, those are going to be the next steps, the things you're going to be working on. You always have a plan. So I think that covered timeline. Do you have anything else you want to add on timeline before we go into governance?
I just wanted to
policies?
reinforce that what you said about prioritizing and those details around basically putting numbers on them. That is so helpful for communicating within the group, and both within your internal team and with your partners that you're working with. So I think that's a great way to articulate that.
Excellent. Well, let's jump into governance and business policies, which, I mean, this for me is one of the most important things, right? Because if you have an issue, and we've talked about this in multiple past videos, where I went on eBay and had a seller screw me out of something, and I didn't want to report him because then I worried about him giving me a bad review, even though he's the one that went back and violated policy, things like that, right? You've got to have governance and policies in place that work, that can address the types of issues that might come up. So you need to be going out looking at all your competitors. You need to be going out looking at other sites, and you need to be reading their governance and their policies, and you need to understand how they operate. And you need to be taking the best parts of theirs and including additional things that you come up with when you come up with yours. This might be the thing that takes, a very, very long time to come up with. So while your vendor is actually working on the platform, while the designer is designing the new skin, while you're working on products, and while you're working on relationships to get all the vendors signed up, and while you're working on commissions and working on reports, I saw a video that Chris did this week. I was out on the channel this morning. He's got this tremendous video called How to Maximize Auction E-commerce Vendor Engagement. It shows the coolest reporting I've ever seen ever for any type of platform. And you can have that kind of stuff. So if I remember, I'll put a link to that video, but if not, go check it out on our channel. It's amazing. But the types of metrics and the types of reports that you can have, those are the kind of things that can be amazing. So while you're working on all of that and the team is building all that out, focus on pulling together your governance and your policies that are literally going to run the ship. When the ship comes aground, when we're heading towards a tidal wave, when we're heading towards a iceberg, when we're heading towards a rock, when there's another small boat in front of us, all of the different scenarios that could happen as we're trying to sail through the ocean on this business plan, what and how are you going to handle each and every one of them as you come upon them? And remember that this is not going to be something set in stone. You're going to have to change because your business is going to change. Your business is going to grow. Things are going to change over time. You're going to come across scenarios over time that you're going to have to be flexible with. You're going to have to figure out how to work through them. And then you're going to want to document them and put a policy or a regulation in place that governs how you take care of that in the future. So this should be a living, breathing document that controls and governs your business. So let me turn it over to you, Chris, and go ahead and expound on what your definition, anything that I defined there. And then if you want to dive into anything else technically about this, go ahead.
Absolutely. I think this is such a key point for marketplaces and really any site nowadays is you can really think of governance and business policies and sort of turn it on its head and say, you want to reduce the friction and you want to make everything possible automated and self-service. And this is really at this sort of at the limit where you're going to provide true value to your end users. Because you can have all the best intentions in the world, you can have all the greatest ideas and the most value in your niche, but you really can't deliver that for all of your different users that are working with your marketplace unless you have self-service, unless you have automation, and unless you can deliver it consistently at scale. And that's exactly what you described, Ron. And I think it is so critical for folks to basically take the time and just think this through for your business. And what's really helpful here is working with a team who have gone through this process many, many times, executed on it in production, and then made changes. They're researching it constantly. And so, certainly we would welcome the opportunity to collaborate with you in this way. But whoever you work with, please make sure that, you select a team that has this type of experience that we're bringing. And ultimately, the point here is that you want to get through each of the steps in the process, just like you described. And I think you said it very well. So I'll just keep it short and sweet and just say that pretty much everything in the process substantially can be automated, or at least the friction can be massively reduced. And you want to really think about this from every different angle or sort of vector, if you will, within your marketplace. So how are the sellers sort of thinking about things? Not just what are they doing, but how are they thinking about it? How are they perceiving it? And how can you influence that consistently? Because if you can sort of get people to be on a higher plane of thought and executing at a higher level as sellers, and maybe operating with more integrity, operating with higher quality standards, quicker turnaround times, well, this is going to be an upward spiral. And it's going to be the same thing for buyers. And you get more buyers because they find it more dependable to work within your marketplace. And how can you set up infrastructure to monitor this? And like you said, Ron, look at the reporting. So there's a lot of depth to this. We certainly go into it in a lot of detail. It's a key aspect for your marketplace to really make it into an upward spiral.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll give you a real world example here. I went on a new marketplace I'd never bought on before. About 2 weeks ago, my brother swears by it and he's bought thousands of things on there. So I said, okay, I'll try it out. And I had been looking, I think you guys have heard me in past videos. I was a DJ many, many years ago back in college. And so I'm big into vinyl. So I have a great vinyl collection. And I've been looking for this particular album. And if you guys are really interested, it's Motley Crue's Theater of Pain, right? I finally found it. And right now it's going for about $100, which is a lot on vinyl when you're like me trying to collect quite a different vinyl. So I found this great deal on this piece of vinyl. So I ordered the vinyl, all excited, was really pumped about this new marketplace because it was the first marketplace where I actually found it at a reasonable price. And the marketplace did a really good job of automating almost everything. Within 3 days, it was an email. Hey, we've notified your seller that they had to ship your item by today, so it should have shipped. And then it was like, notification. We got a notification that your item has shipped from the seller. I'm like, hey, that's really cool. Well, then 3 days later, I get a notification that says, we can't pay your seller until you rate the seller. You're behind. And I'm like, I haven't got the item yet. And then I get another one that says, hey, you're not meeting the policy because you haven't rated the seller yet and we can't release their funds. I'm like, I still haven't got the item yet. Finally, like 7 days later, I get the shipping tracking status. The tracking status for the last 9 days has been waiting for estimate from carrier. I don't even know what that is. So it looks like FedEx came and picked it up and the FedEx person went, ooh, nice album, it's mine. And they stole it and never updated or never did anything. And it's been 9 days. So here I am 2.5 weeks later, still don't have it, poked around on their site 6 different places. And there is no scenario. They've got all these automated scenarios. There is no scenario for me other than just canceling the order. But I want it and I want to get it. And it took me 3 different times poking through the website before I could find a place to notify the seller. So I sent the seller a note like 4 days ago, still nothing back. And now I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't know if my money's gone. I don't know if I have to request cancel the order or is it a refund at this point? Have I paid for it? I don't know. So I probably am never going to buy from that site again, even though my first initial couple days was, I was completely elated and it was amazing. And I was excited that I found this new place. And here I am, just complete sour taste in my mouth, no governance, no policy to deal with my scenario, and almost no recourse because I don't know what to do. And I don't have a phone number to pick up and call somebody. So that's where the governance and the business policies come into play. You have to go through these scenarios. What happens when X? How do your users, Chris said it great, you want to fully automated, you want to make it self-service. So how does Ron, the buyer, deal with the seller? Is it the seller's fault? I don't know because they claim that they gave it to the shipping carrier, but the shipping carrier hasn't done anything for 9 days. So I can't believe that unless the shipping carrier picked it up and it fell down in a slot in their truck and it never made the main office and it just disappeared. I mean, I have no other way to know what happened, right? So let's move on now to hosting and maintenance. Hosting and maintenance is an interesting one, right? I always talk about most of these projects similarly to building a house. Once the house is built, unless you want to add a pool, add a deck, add an arbor, things like that, enhancements and upgrades, which people do over time. They repaint rooms, they do upgrades. And that's kind of the ongoing enhancements you're going to do to the website. But the one thing they do have to do is they have to pay utilities, right? We have to mow the lawn, we have to service. And that's where all the hosting and maintenance fall in, right? Because hosting boils over into performance and security, which are absolutely important to your platform, right? And then obviously the maintenance can be either security, performance, and just standard hosting maintenance, monitoring, or maintenance can boil over into ongoing features, reporting. How do I test the platform? How do I ensure things are going right? How do I measure success? So I'm going to turn it over to you and go ahead and just start talking a little bit about whatever you want to. Because hosting, we could spend a whole entire webinar just on hosting because that security, performance, budget, everything else, right? But go ahead and introduce the team, everybody to hosting and what they should think about planning for their hosting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think this is a pretty deep topic, like you said, and probably the biggest thing is to say in this context that you do want to get into the details when you are planning for your marketplace and at least have an idea about how you're going to manage the hosting and the overall maintenance of your marketplace long term. We're taking a 3 to 5 year view at least. And so with that in mind, who is going to operate the site and actually make sure that things are, managed with some form of SLA, who's going to make sure that there's a minimum sort of cadence of updates and security patching and performance tuning, and who's going to run reporting and auditing to manage the uptime, to adjust based on, possible spikes due to marketing or growth in the marketplace. A lot of times there will be major plateaus of growth, and you'll want to be able to accommodate those in a really sort of low friction way. Most of our clients like to take advantage of the cloud. Quite a few of them still have on-premise and dedicated environments that are virtualized, of course, but they're physically, on site. There are a lot of different options for hosting. Ultimately, the question here is going to be, what exactly is the plan, and who is going to manage it, and take care of it? And some nuances for you to consider are going to be, day to day with the hosting. Who is actually going to be fixing issues if they occur? Who's going to be monitoring and on the hook so that there's, every minute there's a ping, and, every day there's a report on the performance of the site, and someone's operating off of that. Depending on, the level of traffic that you have on your marketplace, you may monitor more often than that. And so who's going to be managing and taking care of this? And then there's a whole detailed, list of topics around security. I won't go into extreme detail, just suffice to say that consistently it is just continually becoming more and more of a pattern that you're going to want to invest in the security side of things. And you'll be required to, in order to work with payment processors and different integrations that you'll typically need to function in the marketplace. There's certain levels of security that you'll have to meet. And this is just going to continue to increase. So we encourage clients to just adopt, and most of our clients do, just adopt a thought process of embracing security as a process that you're going to, work with. So how often are you going to be making security patches and updates to your infrastructure and your hosting? All of this is quite interesting and fun for me. I don't want to bore everyone, though, with detail. There are a lot of nuances we can go into, and we have videos that talk about that. But really, this should be part of your overall plan. And think about the fact that, these changes, whenever you are doing security patches, the monitoring and the ongoing support, this is going to have a cost impact, and it is a logistical aspect that's absolutely critical. Is it necessarily the most complicated part? Absolutely not. I mean, this should be a pretty routine part of the process for you. And whoever you're working with should be able to offer some really nice solutions for this. So it should be pretty turnkey. But it's still critical that you get this plan in place for making sure that you're maintaining and upgrading things, so that, 5 years down the road, you're not dealing with something that's never been updated for 5 years. That could cost you a lot, and you could have to redo everything, 5 years from now, because technology has sort of passed you by. So,
yep. Good point. Yeah, I remember it's been a number of years, but the city of San Antonio came to us, and they had 270 websites and hired us to put their 5-year plan together, do a complete audit of all 270 sites, document every site, where they are, what patches, what modules, what's missing, what needs to be done to make them perfect, then put the 5-year plan together for security and performance for all 270 sites. And I don't remember how many hundreds of pages, but I think if I remember, it was like a 3.5-4 month project for you and the security and infrastructure team to work on that project and put that together. You remember that one? That was a fun project.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And really there's a spectrum there, and that's a really great example of how detailed it can get. And that's really the big thing here, is that you should see this as something that you increasingly invest in as you continue to sort of, get more traffic and more exposure to risk. This is just going to be an area that you'll want to continue to monitor and invest in, and partner with a team like Clarity that can really help you to sort of understand and adjust and tune this based on your specific business.
Excellent. Thanks. All right. So we're heading into the last one for this video, and it's analytics and reporting. One of my favorite. And again, I just watched that video this morning that you did on the auction site, and I thought it was amazing. And unless you're going to correct me here, I would assume that pretty much everything in that video would not only be applicable to just auction, it would be applicable to a marketplace as well, right? Especially since we're dealing with all the vendors. Yeah, and it was really cool. And I'm going to go back and see if I can take a snippet of that video and just kind of play it for you guys here in this video, and just let it run on the screen so you can just get a quick idea of what we're talking about. But I mean, this video that Chris did and this reporting that he showed was as complex as our weekly sales report here at Clarity that we go through, where we're literally shredding every analytic and where every lead comes in and where it is in the process and what was the source of the lead and, you know, all the traffic. I mean, everything. You know, we've got these great reports in HubSpot and these great business analytics reports that we go through and shred every week, you know, to monitor the business and plan for the business and maintain the pipeline and all that kind of stuff that you would want to on sales. Well, this one does it for an auction site, and you can have this same kind of reporting for a marketplace. Now, you can't report on what you don't know, right? I mean, that's the simplest thing. So when it starts, and I'm going to turn it over here to a minute to you so you can talk about this from a technical aspect, but it's very difficult when you come to me and go, hey, Ron, how are things going? It's very difficult for me to drill down and tell you if I haven't collected any information about all those things, because then at that point, it's just anecdotal. Well, I think it's going great, right? I mean, we're making revenue. Well, did you happen to sell one big tractor on the marketplace? And so your revenue spiked this month, so it was up, but you sold a tenth of the normal products that you normally sell. I mean, that's a big difference. Obviously, I used an extreme example to show you that things could be skewed, right? So what do you want to report on? What can you report on? And more importantly, before you can even get to that, and I always start at the end game, right? So I always like to start, what do I want reports on? What would help me? What would, you know, I like to think about it as BI, right? I can make business intelligent decisions if I have information to help me make those decisions, right? If I see a trend going down, I make an adjustment. If I see a trend going up, I make an adjustment. If I see something potentially going stagnant, I might make an adjustment, right? So I start at the end game going, what would I like to report on? Then your vendor can come back and go, in order to produce that report, these are the three pieces of data that we need to have. Two of them you get automatically just by what the people are doing. But this other one, we have to actually start tracking their browsing, because we can't track that for people that haven't logged in unless it's actually in a session cookie that's tracking with them. So we actually have to add the collection of those analytics actually up into the cookie, because that has nothing to do with logins or sales, right? So there might be particular pieces of data that are more difficult to get that you need to make sure to collect that data. It's better to collect too much and not need it than not collect it and then need it when you want to report on it, right? I know I've kind of rambled there, but that's kind of how I go at it when I do this. So why don't you start in on how you attack analytics and reporting?
Well, I think that was great. And I think it should be simple things that you're able to monitor consistently. And there was a really interesting blog and sort of discussion from some of the folks at HubSpot, and really this sort of propagated across other companies that are similar, where they found that, like you said, it's better to have and not need than need and not have as far as data and analytics. But as far as what they were internally auditing and reviewing, they found that if they basically picked a few topics that they were consistently reviewing, this was much more potent for them than having a bunch of data that was sort of overwhelming. Now, you sort of, as a marketplace, you get to deal with the opportunity of dealing with mixed thoughts and different thoughts. The other point that I would share here is that if you consider your vendors and sellers who are listing items within your marketplace, they may have different analytics that they're going to want to look at, and you're going to want to have a baseline for them that you can provide reporting against, and make it so that you can provide extreme value to them. Again, sort of, the baseline for a great marketplace is making it so that there is a ton of traffic of credible buyers that are coming to your marketplace. And in order to really establish that, you really have to have amazing vendors and really strong relationships with those vendors and sellers, so that the logistical aspects, the execution is consistent. Just like the example you gave earlier on with, that one step in the process with the carrier, that could just break your relationship with that marketplace. And a lot of folks, they're going to spend more money and they're going to not worry about the extra cost of working with an existing marketplace that they trust and they believe is credible. So you want to consider that with your reporting. So how does this tie back to reporting, you might ask? Well, you want to be able to understand each step in the pipeline and really be able to visualize this funnel and this process and really understand this customer journey going through your marketplace, both from a seller perspective and from a buyer perspective. And so if you're not able to get at the data, and then if you're not able to consistently boil it down so that your team can analyze it and review it consistently, you're not going to be able to take advantage of the analytics and reporting. And this will literally stymie your growth. This goes hand in hand with governance. Sort of on the governance side, it's some of the gamification and some of the sort of bumpers in the bowling alley. That's what a lot of governance does. The analytics and reporting tells you, hey, you need to put more pressure in those bumpers in the bowling alley. I mean, what good does it do if your bumpers in the bowling alley are halfway inflated and the bowling ball still gets stuck in the gutter? It's like you had the intention, but you didn't execute. And their analytics and reporting really need to be able to have this persistent feedback loop that your team is getting, so you can truly understand accurately, what your performance is. And this needs to propagate into your vendor relationships as well. They need to be able to see accurately what their performance is and be able to tune that as they go. Any other thoughts on that on your end, Ron?
Yeah, from that video you did about the vendor performance that was really interesting is that drove a significant amount of the business on the marketplace. For example, when I go to eBay, one of the things that you're always looking for is, are they a power seller, right? And they earned that. That's a gamification badge that they earned by having either a certain number of sales and completing them, or getting a certain rating over a number of sales, which that is part of the governance. But that's what gamification is, right? So one of the things I noticed in your video that we've done for another one of our clients is that they actually had gamification badges for the top 3 vendors, and does that rotate once a month, once a week? How often do we gamify and take that? So the reporting has moved into ranking the vendors and helping the vendors to earn badges, which entice them to sell more and service the customers better to get better ratings, which is exactly what drives the trust that drives it's a full circle, right? You kind of mentioned all that. And so even though we're talking about reporting can help drive sales indirectly through reporting to the vendors, letting them know their success, letting them know what their profit margin's in, letting them know how their performance is going up, letting them potentially know, as Chris has just said, where the air is low in their bumpers. If you let a vendor know and they can make an adjustment and that improves their revenue, well, guess what? They're going to come back and sell more with you and like your site better because you help them become more successful, which in turn, if they're more successful, you're more successful. So analytics reporting, I love that. Everybody thinks that is an afterthought. I actually believe it's part of every business decision we make. And if you give and extend that same type of analytics and reporting to your vendors, it helps them drive their business. And really in a marketplace, the vendors are your business, right? If they're not coming to your site selling stuff, you have nothing on your marketplace to sell. So it's kind of that full circle. Well, any closing thoughts, Chris?
I would just say that, each of these topics are really detailed, and depending on where you're going with your marketplace platform, you absolutely have an option and a resource with the Clarity team to be able to get complimentary, just, specific to your business and your scenario, complimentary discovery and just suggestions and consultation that truly is, no sales, complimentary, We want to help. And of course, if there's a good fit for us to collaborate together, great. But if not, we'll point you in a direction that, we think based on our experience is going to be best for your marketplace. Certainly, if you found this valuable, we would certainly appreciate if you would smash the like button and hit subscribe. And other than that, we'll look forward to seeing you all in the next video.
All right. Stay tuned, folks. Next video is on scalability and customizations of your marketplace. Bye for now.
Thanks, Ron. Bye for now.